establishing queenside influence early. This flank opening immediately poses questions about pawn structure and future piece development. Embracing the fianchetto often aims for long-term queenside pressure and king safety. Securing the center with a knight, white prepares for pawn advances and potential central pressure. Developing the bishop to this diagonal prepares for castling and contests the central dark squares. Securing the center now asserts dominance, challenging black's fianchettoed bishop and demanding immediate strategic consideration. Developing the knight here efficiently prepares for castling and contests the center's central squares. Gaining central real estate, white boldly stakes a claim for a commanding presence. Securing the monarch's safety now is paramount, preparing for central pawn struggles. Securing central space while preparing for kingside development. Solidifying the center and preparing to challenge white's pawn structure establishes a vital foothold for black's development. Fortifying the kingside pawn structure, this move subtly restricts the bishop's diagonal and prepares for central expansion. Expanding on the queen side, black aims for the fianchettoed bishop's long-range influence. Solidifying the center's pawn chain, this bishop aims to connect the rooks and support a potential queenside expansion. Perfectly developing the bishop to a diagonal that pressures the center and prepares for queenside expansion. Developing the knight to a more central square prepares for an eventual kingside pawn storm, while solidifying white's pawn center. Challenging the center immediately, 8. c5 seeks to disrupt white's pawn structure and create dynamic play. Securing the king allows for bolder central expansion and preparation for potential pawn breaks, aiming to exploit the slightly passive black development. Liberating the d5 square, this knight boldly confronts white's central pawn structure, aiming to unravel the position with dynamic possibilities. Redirecting development to the queenside aims to support the pawn push and potentially challenge black's central control. Boldly challenging the center opens lines and creates dynamic play. Liberating the d-file opens attacking possibilities for white's rook. This capture solidifies black's central pawn structure, opening lines for development while challenging white's ambitious pawn wedge. Unpinning the knight opens lines and creates potential for a powerful kingside attack. Challenging the bishop immediately forces a decision, preventing it from comfortably resting on its strong diagonal. Challenging the bishop's diagonal, white aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially open lines. A daring dive into white's center, challenging control and opening critical diagonals. Forcing a queen retreat simplifies the pawn structure, potentially creating isolated pawns for black later. Exchanging knights clarifies the central pawn structure and frees the dark-squared bishop. Sacrificing the bishop for the knight opens a critical diagonal, forcing a positional concession and weakening black's central control. A brilliant deflection to exploit the exposed queen and orchestrate a mating attack. Retrieving the queen to reignite queenside pressure and contest the central squares offers white a path to re-establish equilibrium. Initiating a powerful counterattack along the open file, preparing to challenge white's centralized queen and exploit the king's exposed diagonal. Capturing the knight eliminates a pesky defender, opening lines for your rooks and creating pressure on black's king. Recapturing the bishop opens lines and forces a material imbalance, creating exciting endgame prospects. Unleashing the queen to contest the open c-file aims to reclaim lost material and disrupt black's rook coordination, though it exposes the king slightly. Snatching the rook might seem tempting, but it abandons vital central control and opens your king to a swift attack. Securing the open file, white initiates a crucial endgame battle, aiming to exploit black's exposed king. Black repositions the bishop, seeking pressure along the a6-f1 diagonal and preparing potential counterplay. Repositioning the queen to the c-file exerts pressure on black's vulnerable rook on a1 and prepares to contest the open files. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside now looks appealing, aiming to shatter white's central control. Aimed at securing the open c-file, This queen repositioning also prepares for potential pawn advancements. The rook charges forward, aiming to disrupt white's queenside pawns and potentially exploit the open c-file for a swift endgame advantage. Initiating knight reunification to challenge black's advanced bishop and eye the queenside potential. Repositioning the bishop to a more active diagonal opens up attack routes along the c-file. Opening the d-file now forces a decisive confrontation. Its control is paramount for either side's attack. A bold sacrifice to seize open files, but watch out for white's queenside pressure. Reinforcing the central outpost, this knight aggressively challenges black's central control and threatens immediate disruption. The bishop now eyes the queenside pawns, aiming to exploit the exposed white king. Swooping in to grab material, white neglects king's safety and opens a pathway for black's pieces to infiltrate. Sensing a chance to equalize material, black simplifies and hopes to exploit the exposed white king. Opening the e-file creates immediate attacking chances, potentially exploiting black's misplaced queen. Opening up the b-file creates dynamic counterplay, aiming to exploit white's slightly misplaced rook. Pushing the pawn forward is a bold attempt to seize space and potentially tie down black's pieces. Opening a crucial passed pawn's path creates dynamic endgame prospects. Challenging black's d-pawn's advance, white aims to solidify control over the central files and potentially create a passed pawn of their own, forcing a difficult decision for black. A desperate attempt to salvage a pawn, but it only opens lines for white's advanced passer. Capturing the pawn opens a vital diagonal for your queen, potentially threatening black's centralized king. A desperate attempt to force a passed pawn, but it's ultimately doomed. Securing the d-file offers a crucial entry for the rook, preparing to exploit black's exposed king. Resigning the passed pawn's advance allows immediate material recapture. Recapturing the pawn opens the rook to the 7th rank, potentially creating devastating threats against black's king. Liberating the bishop from its passive post offers a glimmer of counterplay, aiming to disrupt white's pawn chain. Unleashing the rook targets the exposed king, creating immediate tactical threats. Reclaiming the piece with the bishop opens lines for attack and creates a critical passed pawn. Unlocking the kingside through tempo gain, this recapture decisively simplifies into a winning rook endgame for white.